Hey, everybody, this is Brett Ingram, and this is the optYOUmize podcast, the show that helps entrepreneurs build their dream business and dream life. Today, we're talking with Victoria Pelletier, 20-year corporate executive, board director, best-selling author, and public speaker. She's been nicknamed the Turnaround Queen and the CEO Whisperer because she inspires and empowers her team and clients to change mindsets and drive growth in business, leadership, and culture. I'm super excited about this because we have a lot to unpack here. So, with that, welcome, Victoria. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brett. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, I know that you're going to be sharing with us some amazing tips about how to be better leaders, how to build a powerful personal brand. But I have to start off by asking you about your background. What's been your career path and what led you to where you are now?
Uh, so I laugh a little bit at that, Brett, because I wanted to be a lawyer. That since I was a child, I think my mom forced me to watch too many LA Laws with her. That will tell you how old I am. But I worked for a bank when I was in university and realized how much I loved the corporate world. And by the way, I started working at age 11. Real
Wow.
work. I'm sure there's child labor laws against that now. By 14, it was my first leadership role. I was the assistant manager of the shoe store I worked at. But it was
That's
that
crazy.
banking experience where I was running large call center operations. I got promoted up through the ranks very, very quickly. And so when I was finishing my bachelor's and looking at law school, the bank I worked for offered me a relocation across the country and a promotion in the early days of what we would now call digital banking. They
Okay.
weren't calling it that then. It was like branchless banking, something like that. And so I just put off law school. I just thought, okay, I'll keep doing this. And I found my passion as a leader and the complexity and bringing back that early technology to the forefront. And then I got recruited to my first executive role out of banking to be the chief operating officer and general manager for a private outsourcing company at age
Okay.
24.
Wow.
Uh, but I had banking experience and they had large banking clients, and I had been running really large call center operations, which was at the time primarily what outsourcing involved. And so then that was my foray into the world of B2B professional services. And I've stayed there predominantly ever since, although even some of the work that I'm doing now is completely outside of that space. But a lot of the business skills, M&A that I've done, et cetera, is very transferable.
That's awesome. And so you were lucky enough to find something that you were passionate about. You recognized that early on and then sort of went all in on that, even though you might have had an idea that you were going to go into law or do something different. So, good for you to have found what you love really young. And obviously, you have quite a bit of ability there. I know that every journey has adversity. Obviously, you see it all around us, and I know that yours certainly did. So, despite the fact that you had, pretty rapid success young, can you share with us some of the challenges that you faced along the way and how you overcame them?
Yeah, I've had many. What I didn't mention is I've also built and bought businesses. So I know many of your listeners here are entrepreneurs. So
Yeah.
I'm both an intrapreneur within the large corporations I worked for and an entrepreneur as well. And so I've had some challenges, with that, some learnings along the way. The last business I acquired, turns out there was some misrepresentation in the due diligence, for which I ended up in, a legal situation with her. I was successful, but it was painful. I've also had others in that I mentioned my M&A experience, and part of my nickname of the turnaround queen is from taking distressed businesses and or a lot of the integration work that's come through M&A. So I've been a part of 40
Wow.
transactions. Some of those are for me personally, a lot for the companies I worked for, and many of those also for the clients that I've supported. But I've also had just personal adversity in being a young female queer leader. I am married to my husband happily now for many years, but I'm very openly queer after being married to my ex-wife for 11, and I gave
Okay.
birth to two children in that marriage. And I've been told I wasn't allowed to attend certain client events because I was gay. So I've had to deal with what that looks like, to what it's been like as a woman in business and a lot of time in technology where there are fewer of us,
Yeah.
where I was in many cases the most senior woman at the table. So just dealing with what that looks like, and the challenges of, being a mom through all of that. I became mom to my first child just a few months before I took that first executive role.
Wow. Yeah. So that's, I mean, I can imagine. And also, I mean, certainly now I think things have started to trend in the right direction in terms of, inclusivity and all these other things. But especially, years and decades ago, it was, I mean, I'm sure that was even far tougher than it would be, today. And, for you to be able to overcome all of that and still achieve so much so young. I'm curious, from an M&A perspective and a turnaround perspective. You brought it up, and I want to touch back on that. So when you looked at a company, or whether it was one that you were buying yourself, or to turn around, or for on behalf of a client or a company you were working for, what is it that you would look for in terms of the opportunity to turn something around, or where the shortcomings might be? What are the things that you could do in order to make it more successful than it was currently running?
So there's a whole lot of things that go into it. I mean, when, looking to acquire a company, in some cases, some of mine have been just incredible opportunity, right place, right time. First company I bought, I was 20 years old, and it was the casting agency. I had been an actor when I was younger, and the two guys were
Oh,
looking to exit. So, but I wasn't looking to leave my day job. So I bought it. I, saw the opportunity and and they were prepared to like move back across country, and I brought in a partner to run it and eventually then sold it to her. And so that was
nice.
just, again, great opportunity. The more recent one that was a challenge legally was, again, I saw great opportunity. You might hear a slightest of accent, and usually when I say only a couple of words out and about, I'm originally from Canada. So won't
Okay.
shock
Yeah.
your listeners, like I'm a hockey player and a hockey mom. Um, and I actually met the woman whose company I acquired in the hockey arena. I was coaching
Wow.
our kids. And so it was great opportunity. And so I'd been looking to acquire a business, like do some kind of an investment. And it was primarily a market research technology company. But
Okay.
I was currently in the space of human capital. And so I saw the ability. It was really a data and analytics platform. And how do you just take that and leverage and go to a whole other segment you haven't, even they hadn't even been exploring. She wasn't exposed to that. So that's one. The other, to your point, around a little bit more of the transformational and cost, and how do you turn some of that around in the larger organizations that I've worked for, where we've acquired companies. We're doing it to, in some cases, we're buying the book of business, the clients that they
Okay.
have,
Right.
to integrate them in. In other cases, it's a new market or a segment that we're not in, and it's complementary, or a new product or service that's complementary. And then the ability to like integrate it successfully and achieve the synergies that were, put into the business case for acquiring the company, often comes through some tough decisions, because there's shared services and corporate functions and things like that sit within both. How do you integrate that? But complementary. The acquiring company doesn't need to be the one who has all the, this senior seats at the table, and bring those together, with a lot of efficiencies. My world in like of BPO, business process outsourcing, has been doing your mess for less for many clients, but now doing it, just reflecting a lot of the ways we look at, processes and technology enablement to gain some of those synergies. But you need to do it and act quickly, while being incredibly mindful of the change management and communication being key to maintain the right people, the right kind of, integration of cultures together, et cetera.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know, anytime there's change in ownership, or there's a merger, or somebody's bought out. My father actually went through this. He was in the insurance industry. The company that he worked for was a little bit smaller, and when they merged, they were selling all the things about it that were going to be really good. But I know he was very nervous about it at the time, even though I was just a little kid. And I actually have a current colleague right now who works for a pretty big company, and his division is actually being spun off and sold to somebody else. And so I know that whole process. I understand from a leadership perspective why you'd want to really be mindful of it, because you have to be sensitive to the idea that everybody is uncomfortable and has that sort of uneasy feeling about what's going to happen next. We don't really know where this is headed or what's going to happen. So that makes total sense. So you've seen and been involved with a lot of businesses and companies across your career, and obviously you've seen the evolution of business, if you can call it that, or the changes at any rate that are sort of coming down the pike here. What's your opinion? What is your idea for what you think where business is headed and where the workforce is headed in general?
Ugh. As I mentioned earlier, I've been in the world of human capital, running human
Yeah,
capital businesses. So HR strategy, plus the technology, and certainly the outsourcing components of that. And so I've had the great fortune of sitting in front of leaders, and very much in particular, chief human resource or chief people officers, to uncover what their workforce is doing and what their plans are for the future. And I mean, it's incredibly, incredibly complex. There's lots of things that depend on the industry that you're in. And so, whether it's healthcare, I just think of even how COVID really changed a lot of that, the pandemic, in terms of where people work. Obviously, there were some places where, like I just said, healthcare, that didn't change for them. They needed there to
right.
be there as essential workers. But for many of the other office type work, so what we're seeing is I believe the hybrid model is the one we're going to see going forward. Now, not all of their financial services companies are the first who said what we want everyone to return to the office, but they're starting to see some movement and levers because they want to create more of that flexibility. So I think where people work will be more of a hybrid solution going forward. Technology has changed dramatically. The shelf life of skills now is less than, in general, 2 years. And with generative AI, who knows how much more that's going to, reduce. So how we work, no longer where how we're working is evolving and changing so drastically. And so I think both for employees, I encourage people, you're in chart, you're the CEO of your career. And so don't leave it in the hands of your managers or leaders in the company to chart that course for you, because it is changing so rapidly. So make sure that you're staying relevant and you're upskilling consistently. And a lot of the skills that get left behind when things get automated or outsourced are the more complex exception and transactions. So that's about problem solving and innovation and how we actually engage with the humans, where those transactions or conversations aren't being automated. So that's changing. And then, one other really key piece is, and I didn't like the news headlines. They were effective. The Great Resignation, quiet quitting, but that's a reality that employees have actually forced leaders and executives to be much more thoughtful about the places that we all lead and work in, and that is more around. We know that people do business with people they like and trust
Yeah.
and therefore want to
Mhm.
do business with. And so that there's an expectation now to have that from leaders. I refer to it as whole human leadership, in that we want to work for leaders that we trust, who we believe are supportive of us and our careers, who are transparent in their communications, who are, and this word's abused, but authentic and show
Yeah.
up with some vulnerability, in the workplace. And we also want to work in roles and for companies that are aligned to the kind of purpose, impact, and values that we have. Whereas it was like this command and control, top down consistently, we're seeing that shift. So as I say this to you now, Brett, I just think like it's going to evolve. In 3 months from now, I might actually say, hey, by the way, there's this or there's that also.
It's amazing the speed that everything moves, and a couple things that you mentioned. I mean, I remember sort of the early days of trying to be flexible and adaptable for employees. It was like, okay, well, you could come in an hour early or leave an hour late if you have childcare or you have something else. And I mean, now that's totally flipped on its head, because with the technology where it is, people do have the option to be able to work remotely. That said, I think it's hard. You want to have a company culture that is consistent with what you want. And so if everybody's remote, so I tend to agree with you in terms of the hybrid thing, because I think you kind of need both elements a little bit. You need the flexibility for people, but you also need something that bonds everyone together. And the other point I thought was really, really powerful is the idea that, we're only as good or as valuable as, our skill set and our ability to keep doing things. The days of sort of learning a skill or learning a trade and feeling like that's okay, that's all we have to do because now we're good, our career is all set, those are long gone. When my father, who I referenced before, he got his degree and he got a job at a company, and back then companies still gave pensions. So he worked for this company for 25 years, and literally on his 25th anniversary, his boss was flying down from Philadelphia to lay him off. And his colleagues got wind of it. They told him, you can't, we're having his party today. So he waited 2 weeks and then laid him off. But the rules of the game when he got employed and took a job were different, and they changed in the middle. Nowadays, I think people are aware of the fact that, it's much more of a mercenary type situation where, while that companies will do what's right for them, also people will too. It's hard to keep good people because they'll disappear if they feel like there's a better place for them. So I do think it's sort of created this whole thing where we both have to earn each other. If you're a company, you've got to get people to want to be there, and if you're somebody who's a worker, you've got to give value to a company so they want to keep you. And I think it's fair as long as everybody knows the rules, right?
That's right.
So there's been significant awareness, and I hope progress in the business world around creating diversity, more inclusive cultures in organizations. And I know for you that's one of your particular strengths. So can you share with us some ideas about how to foster that in a business or in a company?
Yeah, it's a passion of mine. As I said, I've been on the outside of fitting in some of these organizations, being so young, being a woman, being queer. I also realized the value to business, not just for the individuals, when I stepped into those early executive roles. So the world of outsourcing is not it's changed somewhat, and it depends on what part of the world you're in, but it's not always seen as the destination. It's a place you go to. I mean, you think about you're answering calls back to back to back or chats now, right? Often angry customers, or you're selling, and so it's for usually underemployed, unemployed people who step into those, or people who are newer to the country. And in
Okay.
my case, I stepped in. I'd never seen so much diversity. I think there were 6,000 employees at the time, and I'm going to say 80% of them were like new immigrants to the country at the time. And it's such vast turnover, like 300%. So
Wow.
I just wanted to find a way to keep them engaged and more productive, and keep them just a little bit longer, because to your point, people enjoyed being there. And so
Yeah.
that's where it began for me. And I've spent much more time now, as I said, again, in the human capital side, working on, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, and B is the important part, belonging. And the interesting thing is it usually sits with someone in HR, the chief diversity officer, or it might be, report directly to or have accountability to the chief HR officer. They're great as subject matter experts to build inclusive policies and to educate others, but they don't own the diversity
Right.
and inclusion. All of us as leaders do.
Yeah.
And so that'd be, one really big point. And then also that it needs to be, woven throughout everything we do within the organization. I find too much focus is on the talent attraction,
Okay.
bringing in diverse talent, but doing very little inside. So they're running out the back door as fast as you get them in the front. So it's about creating an environment in which we feel that sense of belonging. If I come from a different background, in the lunchroom, I'm comfortable bringing a dish that might smell a little different than what others are accustomed to. Or as a queer person, being able to say, hey, my wife and I, instead of playing
Mhm.
pronoun games and like trying to hide those things, knowing that you can show up and be your whole self. Now there's boundaries to what I encourage people to like share, and in that, but it's creating that kind of environment. And although I'm not a fan of having to create incentives for people to do the right thing, we do know that incentives drive behavior. And so sadly, I've seen many companies implement. So, for example, and this is public knowledge, so I'm not breaking any confidence, but when Arvind Krishna took over as the CEO of IBM, where I was working at the time, he actually put part of our executive compensation, a small piece of it was tied to our diversity performance and making sure we could see the needle move forward. So, like I said, on one hand, I'm like, we got to pay people to do that. But on the other hand, well, yeah, if that's what they're incented by, then we need to do that. So, it's a very multifaceted approach to building a comprehensive like DEIB strategy, and making it really that great kind of place that we all feel comfortable, and that sense of belonging in.
That's great. I mean, I understand why it would seem a little artificial to incentivize people or whatever, but at the same time, change is hard. So if we aren't accustomed to something, it might not be that we aren't open to it, but we just aren't used to operating in that certain way. If we then have something that helps us align with that, then it becomes part of who we are and part of the way we normally operate. So the hope is that over time, you wouldn't need the incentives for that, but at least if it works in the short term, it's a good way to at least get it started, right? I mean, so let's talk about branding for a minute. So first off, should we be building a company brand or should we be building a personal brand? And why is branding in general important as opposed to just sales or whatever?
So you need both. You need, corporate marketing and corporate branding. And so I think about, so again, I said Canadian girl, I think of Tim Hortons coffee, versus Starbucks. Like when you think about the corporate brands, they, elicit very different emotions, strong
Hmm.
emotions for both. But I think as a Canadian, it's connected to hockey. I mean, Tim Hortons a hockey player. Like, so you think about that, but it's just, and you're in, you're out. Whereas you think of like Starbucks, it's a place where we created experience and connection with people, right? So it's important that like, what does that corporate brand mean in the eye of the consumer or the employee? But personal brand is very, very important, and not in the necessarily the TikTok influencer kind of way. And don't get me wrong, that's important. And particularly like consumer packaged goods, like retailers want to leverage those kind of influencers.
Sure.
But in business, as I said, people do business with people they like and trust and want to do business with. So you recognize when you buy from IBM, Big Blue, okay, they say it's safe to do that, but like they're not the most inexpensive. So if you're going to go back and you're going to justify that, yes, there's quality and they've got some great people, but in many cases you are actually buying the expertise of people. There's lots of consultants who come with the same amount of experience. So why would I choose to buy from consultant A versus consultant B? And this is where the personal branding piece is so important. And it's more than what you do, more than subject matter expertise. You're doing to quote Simon Sinek, the why they do it. But from a personal branding standpoint, I think there's four parts to having a fulsome personal brand. There's the part that everyone seems to understand, but most stop at, which is what do you do? What's your subject matter
Okay.
expertise, functional industry, whatever? How long have you done it? How great are you doing it? But then it's who are you as a human? We're engaging with humans, and so the second part is around storytelling. What makes you, you? Lived experiences or very different work experiences you've had, the diversity elements, your values, passions, and interests. And many times that's the hook, to build connection with people. Then the next one is what makes you different? So again, why would you buy me, hire me, or buy from me, or engage with
Hmm.
me versus someone else? And so, what's my unique value proposition? My instance, and it's a little, these two are fairly connected, who you are, but what makes you different. I'm radically candid. So, I got the CEO Whisperer title at my last company. I was working very much with CEOs and board members, and it's my differentiator. I am radically candid. I always have been, long before Kim Scott wrote her book and coined that phrase, about I tell people what they need to hear and not what they want to hear. So that's one of those things that makes me different. And then the last thing is, what do you want to be known for? So legacy and impact. So when I die, I don't want people talking about my maybe as a footnote, my business success, but I don't want them diving deep into this M&A experience. Da, 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 da. I'd rather it be about one, I raised two really good humans. I am a good human being. I've been focused on social justice and equity, that I want to do the right thing, those kinds of things. So all of that holistically is, the brand of me. And this is why you're seeing many companies focused on identifying key individuals in the business. Should be everyone, but
Yeah.
they are, connecting with some that will be much more of the business influencer to others, and how you build a cohesive strategy around that.
That's so. I mean, there's so much in there to unpack, but I love the whole idea because I think I've said a number of times that we're actually sort of entering the authenticity age in the sense that now content creation and all that stuff is very easy. You could just go out there. There's a ton of AI tools. You can crank things out, but there isn't any. There's no life to that because there's no human experience with it. There are no values attached to it. There's nothing that anybody stands for when it's just coming from a machine. And so to use it for shortcuts here and there and stuff makes a lot of sense. But from the branding standpoint, I know even when I was thinking about my podcast and starting it off, one of the questions I had to wrestle with is, what do I want this to be? What do I want it to stand for? And I said, I'm just going to do it the way I would do it because it has to be something that's authentic and comes from me. So I'm not trying to put on a show or be a persona or anything like that, because if it's authentic, the right people will resonate with whatever message that you've got. And I mean, I love that. I guess the question I would have is, so if somebody's out there and they're thinking, I want to be able to build a brand, and let's just say we're focused on a personal brand, but I'm not really sure, like, what do I actually do? What can I do to start that process? Do you have tips for somebody if they wanted to, start to build a personal brand?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting with sort of those four foundational elements. Slight plug here. I did write a book on personal branding called Influence Unleashed. It came out of the fact that when I was at IBM, LinkedIn ranked me as IBM's #1 social seller. That's what they call it.
Wow.
It's more than personal brand. It's your network. It's how you engage. It's many things. So IBM asked me to develop training for its executives. I ended
Amazing.
up deciding, and I continued to talk and coach a lot on that. So I wrote a book. There's a free companion on my workbook on my web. I would like you to read it, but if you don't, you can go to my website, download it for free. And so the first thing I say is you got to get comfortable in your discomfort. I talk about like the 3 acts of engagement before you get started around, being courageous, being vulnerable, and figuring out that like authentic you and how you're going to show up. And the next part is sitting down with each of those foundational elements of subject matter expertise. And I'm finding more and more people have portfolio careers. And so they've got different, and that might not actually be connected to one another. So
Hmm.
figuring out how those different elements come together with what parts of the storytelling and who you are and how are you going to show up. And again, what makes you different, legacy and impact. I told my, now 24-year-old son when he was coming out of college to start with that. Now it's going to evolve and change it dramatically. First of all, then 22 or 23, he doesn't know what the heck he like wants to be known for much
Right.
later. So like,
Right.
I get it. There's ages and stages of life and it's going to evolve and change. But you need to do the hard work of crafting that and also understanding your goals. Why are you doing this? And who is your audience? You should not attempt to be all things to all people. And
Yeah.
getting clear on where is the audience. I've made a decision. It's not that my audience isn't on TikTok. I know lots of people are scrolling through there, but that's a platform where my business, like customers and clients, are not there for business purposes generally. And so I've made some decisions over what platforms I'm on. So get really clear on those things and find some trusted people who are going to tell you what you need to hear and also talk about perception. How are you perceived today? You might actually need to make some shifts.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. And I think, to your point about not always knowing who, you want to be or who you are even, I think just having that question though in your mind lets you continue to work on it and continue to cultivate that. and you start to crystallize it as it goes. And I know for some people, they recognize that really young and things are very clear. And I think for other people, it takes a lifetime to sort of figure that out. But, if you're sort of working on that, I know for me, one of the challenges, was the vulnerability. I mean, quite frankly, I believed that if I was going to do anything where I was going to share my voice or my ideas, I had to be the expert all the time on everything that I was, talking about and who I was talking to. And there's something liberating and very, freeing to just be able to say, I don't have the answer, or I made this mistake. I'm sharing this because I don't want you to make the same mistake. And that actually, for me personally, was a challenge. It wasn't easy, but I think it's super important because people can relate and connect with vulnerability in a way that just somebody who knows everything about everything seems sort of a little bit either unreal or untouchable because they're not human, right?
That's right. I do. I do think we need to humanize ourselves, and that's a big part of what personal branding is about.
I think that's great. So I know you talk about relationship-based selling. Can you share with us what that is?
Yeah, I give the big sigh in advance because I find most companies talk about relationship-based sellings or account-based marketing, like all these pieces, yet they're not patient enough to let that play out over time because there's quarter to quarter results. And so what I see is many companies walking around and asking their commercial folks, sales and client management people, to walk around with a toolbox of stuff just to sell, versus building authentic relationships with people and building them from a place of actually from a place of generosity and not greed. There's a book called Never Eat Alone, which talks a little bit about networking strategies. It's a shameless self-promoting consultant, but I love his book, and it's about building your network. And I'm going to say he didn't talk about it in the relationship-based piece as much as I will now, like from a place of, again, generosity and not greed, and building connection with people, talking about brand because you've got this commonality that you've now understood, and then trying to solve. So for me, being in the B2B professional services world, it's been getting myself and my team members to understand what's the business strategy, and for the individual we're selling to, like what are their pain points. And a really differentiating question I often ask is like, how is success measured? And how are you incentivized? Like, how can I help with that? And then we come up with solutions together. But that takes time to develop trust in those
Yeah.
kind of relationships. And so I remember for one organization, I will protect them, there was a troubled, like massive client portfolio. There'd been a really rough project, very large project. Several executives at that company had gotten fired. And I think the organization I worked for wore it. I think it was a joint, but we wore a
Okay.
lot of it. And so I remember saying to them, like, this is probably 24 months to rebuild trust, relationships with the existing and new people who have perceptions about us before you can expect to see a return to same levels, let alone any kind of growth. Now, I'm happy it happened in a much shorter, not much, a short 15 to 18 months instead of 24 months. But that came with, again, that, meeting with people with zero expectations other than to get to know you and how to rebuild that kind of trust. And so that's where I spend a lot of time with my teams. There's two good books I recommend. You can tell I'll say I read a lot. Now it's all Audible.
Yeah.
But the never or beyond never, sorry, the challenger customer and the challenger sale. One is about the types of people in companies, and the other is about the dynamics of who the buyers are. And so that's what I refer to as strategic intentionality. As a commercial person, you need to know whom you need to connect with and who the other decision makers are, to build relationships with them. But then how you approach them is the way in which I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I think that that's super important. I was in staffing for 5 years when I was younger, and I remember, when I would go to, client offices, I knew that we were a commodity, right? I mean, there was a staffing company on every corner, and so the challenge was how do you differentiate yourself? And for me, I tried to connect with clients on things that were outside of work. So if I was in their office and I saw, they have a a picture of a Mets sticker or something like that, I'd make fun of that because I'm a Red Sox fan, so I don't like the Mets. And, talk about every other thing where we could sort of bond as humans without any expectation of what I was going to get out of it, but just knowing that it's more comfortable for everybody if you like each other and you have something in common, or you sort of gotten to a level of familiarity where then you can talk with your guards down honestly about what their needs are and what you have that might be able to fill it. And if you don't, then you can be honest about that too. But I think relationships, we live sometimes in such a transactional world that I think sometimes that gets a little bit lost or sort of put on the back burner. But I agree. I think it's super important. So, all right. So tell us, where can we find you and your programs, services, and everything else that you have to offer?
The best place to find me is on my website, which is Victoria-Pelletier.com. And so there, the public speaking, the books that I've written, sort of thought leadership is there, but also the links to connect with me on the other social platforms if people would prefer, they can find directly
Awesome.
there.
And then my last question that I always have to ask is, what's your number one tip for success as a business owner or an entrepreneur?
Well, I love the quote by George Adair that says, "Everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear." And so I said earlier about leaning into your
Hmm.
discomfort, and I mean that's important in all facets of our lives, but being an entrepreneur is hard. I actually think making the leap to do it the first time, like that's pretty bold. But get comfortable in that discomfort and surround yourself with great people. Particularly, I think entrepreneurs often think they have to do it all, and until they're scaling and can afford to, hire people, but find others that are going to complement the world of fractional. Like all those that have their portfolio careers can be incredibly beneficial to entrepreneurs. So lean into your discomfort and surround yourself with
That's
great
great.
people.
I mean, I know I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and when everybody has the same story, when they were starting, they were all excited. All you can see is sort of the brass ring, and you're excited. Then you get into it, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm like a professional problem solver. I mean, it's one problem after another, like whack-a-mole. So, absolutely true. That's excellent advice. All right, so with that, it's just about time to wrap things up. I want to thank you again, Victoria, so much for sharing all your insights and great tips with us. Go to victoria-pelletier.com to read her articles. That's Victoria-Pelletier.com to read her articles, get her books, book her for speaking engagements, and find out all the rest of the stuff that she can do for you. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, remember, no matter what you want out of your business and your life, don't compromise. optYOUmize.